Hello and welcome to the MBM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey friends, I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about MBM Behind the Scenes. When I entered the yoga world as a teacher, I was surprised by how many yoga teachers were struggling with the business side of yoga. And that's why I created MBM. MBM helps yoga teachers and studio owners become entrepreneurs. It helps you to go from surviving to thriving with your yoga business. I am on a mission to change the yoga industry, to teach yoga teachers and studio owners about the business of yoga, and to help you feel more confident, successful, and abundant. After releasing hundreds of podcast episodes, I want to create content that dives deeper into helping yoga entrepreneurs thrive and elevate their businesses. This is where MBM Behind the Scenes comes in. Each week, you will get bonus content from the weekly guest or myself, diving deeper into how you can take the teachings and apply them to your business. This podcast is designed for yoga teachers and studio owners who are ready to take it to the next level. If you enjoy MBM and have been looking for an affordable way to learn more, this is it. For the cost of 2 lattes per month, you will get never-before-heard content that you can't access anywhere else that will give you tangible ways to dive deeper into your yoga business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, let's dive in. Head on over to patreon.com/MBM yoga and sign up to get behind the scenes now. Once again, that's patreon.com/MBOM yoga to get all the exclusive behind the scenes content. I'll see you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the MBM podcast. I am very excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. This episode is brought to you in part by OfferingTree, an all-in-one, easy-to-use online business platform that I've been working with for years. And if you're looking to save time, energy, and money, I definitely recommend that you check out OfferingTree. Don't forget to grab your special discount at offeringtree.com/MBM. And of course, I'll be telling you more about OfferingTree later on in this episode. And I am super excited because we are actually joined by Alex Haley for today's episode of the show. And Alex is one of the co-founders of OfferingTree. He is also a mindfulness and meditation teacher. So in this episode, he shares his journey with yoga and meditation, what inspired the idea and creation of OfferingTree. So you'll get to hear a little bit of background on the formation of OfferingTree, which if you've listened for a while, you've probably heard lots about them. And we're also going to talk about what trends he's seen that have been working well for yoga teachers and yoga studio owners over the past year, including the importance of community and how we as yoga teachers get to influence our communities in a big way. And we're talking about lots of other things too that he's seen through working in the wellness industry, running a software platform, and all of that good stuff. So this episode is jam-packed with goodness. I know you're going to love it. So let's dive into it. Without further ado, here is Alex. Welcome to the podcast today, Alex. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to connect with you in this way. I feel like it's been a while since we've been able to hop on the phone and just chat about all things yoga. So I think it'll be really fun to just dive in. And before we get to, all the good stuff, I want to hear a little bit about your background. How did you first get into the wellness space? Where did the idea for OfferingTree come in and all of that good stuff?
Yeah, I first got into the wellness space when I was pretty young. So my mom is a meditation teacher. It took me a little while to come around because, if my mom was meditating and I was a young adolescent, it wasn't a cool thing. So I had to get a little older, but I also had a math teacher who introduced me to meditation. And then when I got into college, I really got into yoga and a lot more formal study of yoga and meditation. So It was at a pretty young age that I had some early exposure, and that stayed with me my whole life. So I did a lot of traditional study and business, and I even studied law for a little bit, and then studied cognitive science. But while I was doing all of that, I was spending all my free time studying these contemplative modalities and studying movement based systems and even body based healing modalities. And it was always odd to me because I felt like these two worlds were literally worlds apart, and there was a lot that they needed to teach each other. And that is some of the backstory of kind of how OfferingTree came to be, because I found myself working as a part-time manager at a small donation-based yoga studio, and they were struggling so much with keeping the community vibe while also trying to put in place the technology and the sort of business processes they needed to grow. And that was a moment in which I was sort of a translator between worlds. I was able to bring in my business background, my background with technology at the same time that I understood the importance of maintaining community and having a community vibe. And so that's a little bit of the sort of whirlwind tour, if you will, about me and my background.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really cool to hear. And so when did it kind of, I guess, like when did Offering Tree kind of go from like, okay, I see this sort of need in the space because I'm working with yoga studios that are struggling to kind of bridge this gap between like efficiency and systems and keeping the community to like, I'm actually going to create something to solve this problem?
I'd say the shift happened actually about the time I picked up the phone and called my co-founders, because at the time they were just friends who knew a lot about programming. I knew a little bit, but not enough to do what needed to be done. And so I called them, and they said, well, we could absolutely help with the studio, but this might be a larger problem. And from there, we started talking to hundreds of teachers, a lot in yoga, a lot in meditation, some coaches, massage therapists. And we kept hearing the same thing over and over again, the same pain points, the same problems. And so it was at that point that we realized that nobody was really paying attention to the teacher or the smaller studios. A lot of what was out there was geared towards larger businesses or businesses with multiple locations, and it was very complex and costly. And so from the outset, we set up the company to be a benefit corporation because we wanted to instill it with the sort of values that we all held around having a positive impact in the world. And at the same time, we wanted to really meet the needs of what we were hearing and talking to all these teachers. So it's hard to believe, but at this point, that's been almost 5 years at this point. So 5 years ago.
Wow, that's so cool to hear. I love hearing just kind of like the story of how Offering Tree kind of started out. And you're totally right. Like what you're saying about just the way, I guess, like software was, 5+ years ago, is it wasn't really set up for smaller studios or smaller businesses or just independent yoga teachers who are working for themselves. And I remember like, starting to practice yoga, 10+ years ago. And it's like some of the bigger studios with multiple locations would have, fancy software to sign in and like, little plastic passes you could put on your keychain so that you could sign in that way. And then other studios would be like, just write your name on this like notebook and you can like pay via cash or something like that. And I felt like I noticed this kind of big discrepancy between the bigger, well-established studios and like the smaller ones or the smaller yoga teachers. And I feel like you just don't see that as much anymore because there are, softwares like OfferingTree and other softwares kind of bridging this gap where it's like there's a lot of opportunity available for all different ranges of businesses now.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we're seeing that as well. When we started 5 years ago, there wasn't really one. And now it's like there's all of these different companies and services that have popped up. A lot of it, being triggered by the pandemic. But even a little bit before that, we were starting to see a lot more new services popping up. So I think the space is a lot more going on now.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've seen the exact same thing and would echo what you said about very much like the pandemic as well. Like it kind of seems like the pandemic kind of shifted things again, like tipped the industry on its axis, and a lot of, businesses kind of stepped up and switched gears and that type of thing, and are servicing yoga teachers and studio owners in a different way, which is pretty, interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
And
also oh, sorry, I was going to say
no, you go ahead.
one piece that has really struck me, and I didn't fully appreciated it, but then I saw an article about it. It was talking about there's also this chasm between small studios and even independent teachers and these larger corporations. So I can just give you one number that I came across recently. So since the pandemic, there's been about 9,000. This was in the health industry, so not yoga, but parallel. So we can find parallels. About 9,000 health clubs that shut down. So that's 22% of the total. This is within the US, but of course, these numbers can apply elsewhere throughout the world. So 22% basically of health clubs shut down. At the same time, the revenue for Peloton went from 1.8 billion to 4 billion in a year.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah. So it shows that we are going through a storm collectively, but we're not all in the same boat.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting to think about that. And I'd actually love to hear like some of the maybe changes or shifts you have seen as like a business owner, like running a software that obviously helps yoga teachers immensely, especially in a time where they need to like pivot or be online or work for themselves. Like, what are some of the biggest changes you've kind of seen in the yoga space over the last like 2 years?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest shift we've seen is before the pandemic, you could get by with not having a website or an online presence. I mean, if you were able to connect yourself with a studio, maybe one or two studios, you could have a regular set of classes that you taught. You'd interact with the regular students that came through the door. Now, no, you can't. You have to have an online presence. It's just so it's changed, and even the expectations of students have changed. There's this expectation that at times I may want to come into the studio, but at other times I actually kind of enjoy being in the comfort of my own home or my own apartment and being able to, do a class online or watch an on-demand video or whatever it might be. So I think our behaviors have shifted in a way that they're not going to totally go back to the way they were pre-pandemic, which means that the skills that you need and how we show up is different. And so a lot of what that's meant for us has really been providing a whole lot of new features and support for online teaching. The other thing that we've been doing a lot of is providing education, right? Because for many teachers in small studios, they've never had to do this before. So they're not only are they having to figure out how to put stuff online, but they're having to learn how to be a filmmaker. They're having to learn how to be an audio editor. They're having to learn all of these skills that are necessary to make it in this new world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting to hear. And it's so funny because like prior to the pandemic, I feel like I would have said like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good with like the online space. Like I'd worked online for, 5 years at that point, like remotely from all corners of the world, hosting podcasts, making videos, that type of thing. And yet it was still, supporting studios and teachers. I found it like challenging to kind of think about like, well, what microphones do we use? What cameras are best? How do we set up like storage for recording things? How can we set our businesses up in a way that like everyone feels comfortable and happy? And there's just a lot of moving pieces with it. And I think there's a lot of adjustments that studios and teachers have gone through throughout this whole situation. But I really agree with what you're saying in terms of like, I think there's a lot of people who really kind of like this new model. Like one of the things we've seen at one of the studios I work with is people really like practicing the early morning classes, like the 6 a.m., 6:30 classes at home. Like there's something that they really like, which I totally get, obviously, about rolling out of bed, making some coffee, and practicing in their pajamas from the comfort of their home. And I think it's going to be a hard sell for people to get them back in the studio at that time because they're like, cool, I've discovered this thing that's way better than what I was doing before.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's right. The other part that I've noticed, I'd be curious if you've seen this, Amanda, is there's a because of the collective loss that we've gone through, and and loss on so many levels, loss of seeing friends and family. We may have even actually lost somebody during the pandemic. I mean, they may have passed away, or the loss of our workplace not going in, the loss of so many different things. There is a craving for connection, but that connection, to me, feels like it's more of the everyday kind of connection. So another shift I've been seeing is that pre-pandemic, there might have been this search for these sort of peak experiences or elite experiences where you would go to some destination, you'd have, a retreat that was secluded in this place, and this, of course, is assuming you have the means to do all of this, but there was this sort of aspiration to do that, and now it feels to me like it's so much every day. It's like having a connection, going for a walk, seeing somebody, in the community. Maybe you practice together, whether it's, you're doing yoga together or you're jogging together or something like that. But it's this very um, immediate sense of human connection on a sort of like daily activities level. And to me, that's been another real shift. So it highlights the importance of community building at the local level. So even if you're online, the model is not that you're going to be blasting out to millions of people around the globe, which would be more the Peloton model, right? You sort of have this person that looks like a demigod in some studio in New York that's totally, just glistening and light shining, and there's music and they're being broadcast to millions of individuals. I think the reality for the sort of smaller studios and solo teachers is really to create that more immediate, like real human daily basis kind of connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this is one thing that has been an interesting shift for, I think, a lot of teachers and a lot of studio owners, because, prior to the pandemic, we saw, like you're talking about these businesses, these big businesses like Peloton, or even in the yoga space, like there was just a couple of major platforms that did this, like, online kind of like Netflix style video on demand monthly membership. And I think it was actually, I did a workshop with OfferingTree, and one of the students asked, well, why would somebody pay for like my monthly membership when they could just go to like Glow Yoga or something like that? And I'm like, because they want to interact with you, because they want to be a part of your community, because they know you as a teacher. And I think that this is so very real for people and so very true. Like, I feel like I've seen it with everyone that I've worked with throughout this entire time, where it's been like, people want to support their local studio. They want to practice with the teachers they know. And they kind of, like you said, they're seeking this community and this connection, like being at home by yourself and just always talking to people like over the internet can meet a need for connection, but it's not the same as being in person. And I feel like there's something about like going on a Zoom call and somebody like sees you and knows you by name and stuff, which you're just not going to get when you have kind of this like Peloton or like Glow Yoga experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And actually, I'm so glad that you're raising this, because this is something I've been reflecting on a lot these days. And we can actually use, I sometimes use just the example or the metaphor of family, right? Or family and friends maybe is the metaphor I would use, where if we think about like Glow Yoga or Peloton or whatever, any of these companies that are sort of taking this, broadcasting to a large audience, it's sort of like the model would be they're really catering to acquaintances and friends, which is a one to many model. So it's like one person going to many people, so a one to many, and this is where You're following them, they're interested, but you don't really know what's going on in their life. I mean, like with an acquaintance, you see them every once in a while, but there's not really this bedrock of a relationship. And if you go one circle closer, right, with this sort of family metaphor, the friends, it's sort of a one to some model, which is where you're interested what's going on, what's happening in their life. You're staying connected. There's a kind of a mutual support, just like friends support one another. And that model is it's harder because if you're doing that sort of like broadcasting to millions of people, you can't have that level of connection. And I think the sweet spot for a lot of studios and teachers is if you think about two rings in from that. So if you go acquaintances as the outside ring, friends as the next ring in, and another ring in is extended family. So this is where you're connected, you're willing to support, you're aware of sort of major life events, there's a kind of regular contact. And so this is a higher touch experience. This would be a one to few. So really it's about access and connection, just like extended family. You have connection, you see them, you're communicating, there's communication both ways. This would be things like what you were mentioning, the live events, whether they're in person or online, memberships, things like that. But there is a sense of a kind of extended family kind of feel. Again, you can give me a little leeway with this metaphor. I'm assuming this is family of choice. You may not really like your extended family, so just in this metaphor, assume that this is a extended family of choice.
It's like your favorite cousin.
Yeah, like your favorite cousin, exactly. And then I think that the most inner ring, which is another sweet spot, is this immediate family. It's sort of this one-to-one. And that's where, you really are there through thick and thin. It's much more personal attention. And this is where teachers and studios can have these more closer ties where there is a lot of communication. It might be like private coaching or private sessions or one-on-ones or trainings or, even just like I saw one studio that was doing a book club. Right. I mean, that's sort of like a one to few model, but in that space of one to few or one to one, I think there's some real opportunities. And what if you contrast that, glow yoga and these other things, are there more in the acquaintance and friends space? And if you try to compete in that space, you won't be able to.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that metaphor. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about what you've seen teachers doing that has worked really well for them in this capacity. Like I know you mentioned kind of like the book club or doing privates, coaching, there's some other examples of things you've seen that have worked quite well for teachers.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with just how creative many teachers in small studios have been. Another really successful thing that I've seen, and in hindsight, it was like, oh yeah, that's so obvious, but I didn't think of it. It was like a bring a friend class, and what it was doing is it was marketed in a way that it was taking advantage of the fact that it was an online class. So it was a smaller class, again, not huge numbers. But the idea was that there was one day where you were meant to invite a friend or a family member, and possibly somewhere else around the world or country, to join you for the class. And then that class had a completely different feel because you were bringing in a friend or a family member, and in that way. The studio was now getting exposure to a wider network. And often those people that came in for the bring a friend or family member day came back. And I thought, that's really creative because it's leveraging a relational approach in a way to create a shared experience during this period of isolation. And so that was something that happened during lockdown that I thought was just really incredible. Another thing I've seen is like a passport challenge, where what you do is it's a little bit of a play on the fact that we can't go anywhere, right? We're in lockdown, and the idea was that you tried to go to as many different styles of class, like it might be yin yoga or it might be some kind of like vinyasa or some other, these different classes that were offered at the studio, and you would get a little stamp like for each of the classes you attended. And so then it was this community um, program to see how many different classes and different teachers you could practice with. So you could do that if there were a number of teachers. You could get together with a few of your fellow teaching colleagues and just do sort of like a passport challenge. So those are some of the examples of these really creative where I thought, oh, that's really creative.
Yeah, I love those. I think it's cool the idea of like kind of playing off the password idea. You could do some sort of like yoga bingo or something like that too. Could be kind of like a fun way to get people excited, and I don't know, maybe give prizes for people who are getting the bingos or blackouts or something like that. Um, and it's cool that you brought up the bring a friend, because actually one of the studios that I work pretty closely with is doing something like that actually right now. And you can bring your friend to, you just like send them, forward them the email or like email the studio, and then we'll set their friend up with the pass so that they can come together to the studio or come online or whatever they choose. They don't have to come to any particular class. It's kind of just like, bring your friend who's never been to the studio to like your favorite class. And they've been doing it for just like a week or so now, and they've just extended it because it's been going really well. And it's a really cool way to kind of use like word of mouth marketing, essentially. Like, I really like this thing, so I tell you it's cool, but maybe you feel uncomfortable like going to yoga by yourself. So I'm like, oh, well, you can come do it for free. So like, why don't you come with me? We can like, go for lunch after, or go for coffee or something like that, have this like fun experience. And then, hopefully the person enjoys the experience and wants to go again.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's this sort of word of mouth, and it's so relational, which is what that's part of the loss that we're all still experiencing and going through this, the isolation and the craving for connection.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really noticed like early on in the pandemic, or really realized, and I think I knew this before, I just wasn't, I guess, thinking about it in this way or thinking about it as clearly. But I really feel like yoga studios can be like the heart of a community. And, I think seeing these studios like have to shut down and then have to pivot, and just seeing like the support that kind of came out of it, it was like very clear to me like how much these students really appreciate this space. And it's not just for like the yoga asana, it's also for, the connection to their friends that they get to come see in classes, or the connection to the teacher. And it was just a reminder to me that, as yoga teachers and studio owners, like we really are like holders of community or holders of space. Like we do kind of cultivate these communities and these spaces where people can kind of just come and be as they are. And obviously having these spaces closed down is like hugely detrimental to our communities. And so it's kind of like, how do we continue creating these spaces for people so that they still have these spaces to turn to when they need them? And, obviously the practices of yoga as well, because those are really great, especially during trying times. But I think that community piece is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say I've also been reflecting a lot on this dimension because um, it's been a little while since I last checked, but when I did, the amount of anxiety and depression. So there was almost I think it was a threefold increase. I'd have to go back and I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was a two or threefold increase in the incidence of anxiety. And then similarly with depression, I think it was just a little less than a twofold increase in depression. And so that, again, to me, really speaks to the importance of these spaces for physical and mental well-being, and even being able to just acknowledge the pain and difficulty and trauma that we've been going through, and that's a important piece, is that those places of connection where we feel like we have purpose, there's meaning, there are others that we can connect with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I haven't looked too much in detail at those types of stats, but I'm not surprised like at all to hear that there would be, an increase in things like anxiety and, depression. And I think mental health has been very challenging for a lot of people, myself included, over the last, couple of years with the pandemic. And it's just gone on for so long that I think so many people are just like ready to move forward. And I think having those spaces where you kind of feel safe and comfortable and like you've got that community is so, so, so important. It's huge for us. And I think it's just something that, for the yoga teachers and the studio owners listening, like really not to kind of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Like forget that aspect. Like, I think sometimes we can kind of look at like, the numbers and the attendance and how things are going, the classes we're offering. And we kind of see like all these metrics we're looking at with our business to kind of determine like success or failure. But I think there is this like deeper piece too of like, what are we really giving to people outside of like the service of yoga? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say another thing I've noticed, and this is a hard one, is also for as a teacher or as a studio to ask for support. And it's, for me, and particularly in the teaching role, I'm so used to being in the place of sort of holding space, offering support, and I was just struck by your comment a moment ago about just saying, referring to it's been difficult even with your own mental health. Same with me. And so to actually at times be able to ask for support that you might need from the community because it's it's another dimension of isolation that can occur for teachers and studio owners. And I've been really inspired by some studios that have done that. They've really reached out to the community and said, "Hey, we really need your support. We need your support in these ways." And if it doesn't work right now, if things are going on, it's too much, there's too much happening in your life, that's totally okay. But for those of you that have a little bit of capacity, we could really use your support in these ways. And that's pretty radical. I hadn't seen studios asking, but I think that is, I think it is a pretty important dimension of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, it's like in our society, and especially in our Western society, we're really conditioned to kind of like not ask for help, like to kind of just like, bear the burden on our own. And I mean, I think if it's like the difference between losing your business or your business having to shut down and, kind of putting out this call for support or for help, I think it's totally worth it to like put yourself out there and be a little bit vulnerable. And I think one thing that's so cool that I saw kind of early on was with the studio that I work with in Canada, the community is very small and it's pretty tight knit there. And we were pivoting online, like didn't really even miss a beat. And there was like a whole group of like regular members who sent an email to the owner that was like, even if, you're closed for a little bit or we can't do classes, like, please don't cancel my membership. Like, I want to make sure that I'm supporting you so you can stay open, which was, such a beautiful, like, just thing to have somebody reach out and say when you're just trying to figure out how you can continue to support your people and, keep your business like alive. And then also people who were reaching out and saying, hey, I'd like to gift $500 to the studio. Please like use the money to donate memberships to people who have like lost their jobs or who really need this right now. And I mean, we had like a couple of people like that where I was just like, wow, like the willingness of people to be generous is really beautiful to see in like a time of crisis.
Yeah, and I think you're highlighting again what I so appreciate in what you're sharing is that it's not any one individual's responsibility. It's a collective shared responsibility. And so I had a teacher, actually, this is my math teacher who originally got me into meditation. She had this wonderful teaching that she shared, and she was talking about generosity. And she said, there are these two, they're called near and far opposites. So of generosity, the far opposite, which seems pretty intuitive, it's where we have the ability to support, we have the ability to be generous, but we're in a kind of a fear-based mentality, so that we actually maybe are we're deliberately holding back. We're just, if I was using a word, it's like maybe we're holding back and we're being a little bit stingy, even though we know that, we could be generous, right? So that clearly is the far opposite of generosity. But then she said, there's the near opposite, and the near opposite is giving with reckless abandon, giving in a way that actually harms your own immediate well-being, when actually in that moment it's a recognition that we all can serve and give in different ways. And so it's not any one individual, just like you're saying, like if I lost my job, I'm not going to be able to support the studio financially. But that doesn't mean that there are other members in the community that maybe still have their job, and maybe they're spending less because they're not commuting as much to work. They're not buying as much gas. They're not all these different things. So, collectively, there is a holding that can happen that can't happen on the individual level, that no one person can be responsible, but together we can actually look out for each other.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that that's really, really beautiful. And I think it's just something for us to kind of like keep in mind. I think for a lot of us, we might feel sort of like out of, I don't know, out of the woods with this thing a little bit, but there's going to be like other crises that come up, economically, financially, globally. And I think that we can really like learn some valuable lessons in terms of like how we can kind of lean on each other, and like the importance of community and the importance of communication and that type of thing. So I think that that's really awesome. Hey, yogis, we're just taking a quick little break from the podcast to talk about on-demand video. I've seen how having an on-demand video library has really improved customer retention for 2 yoga studios that I work with. That's why I was so excited to create a free course all about video on demand with OfferingTree. This course will tell you all you need to know about using an online store to offer live stream classes, courses, a membership, and have a library of on-demand videos. The best part is that it will only take an hour to go through the course, and you can do it on your own schedule. You can get access to the course at offeringtree.com/course. As yoga teachers or studio owners, our goal is to always retain current customers and attract new customers. But it has to be easy, because we're wearing so many hats all the time between actually teaching sequencing classes, running our marketing, our sales, paying ourselves, paying our bills, all of that stuff. And that's exactly what this course is about. I'll teach you how to develop an on-demand video strategy that's simple, easy, and really works. So whether it's the strategy, marketing, pricing, or video editing process that's holding you back, this course can help you. So head on over to offeringtree.com/course to get started. All right, now back to the episode. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Alex, was I think just like running OfferingTree, you guys probably have some pretty cool insights in terms of like what teachers and studios are doing, what's working, what's not working. I know we talked a little bit about the community piece and, what's been working for kind of studios and teachers kind of gathering their communities. What other things or what other trends have you kind of seen, studios and teachers doing that seems to be like working quite well right now in this sort of new like hybrid world that we're living in?
Yeah, I would say that a couple of trends we've seen. One is providing opportunities for students and the community to go a little bit deeper. But to do that in a way, and this is both in learning and in practice. And one of the ways that we've noticed a lot of teachers and studios doing this is actually creating courses, because the challenge is that, if you have to constantly be teaching live, you'll get burned out particularly if you're a solo teacher. You just, you can't be constantly training and teaching classes. It's just too much. But by creating courses, you can actually provide the opportunity for students and the community to go a little bit deeper. And so there's 2 different models that we've seen. There's one model, which is the sort of on-demand courses. So, student can take it whenever they're available. And that's really appealing right now because it has a lot of flexibility. The other model we've seen that's been successful just with some of our users on our platform is the sort of cohort model, where you get a group of people together and they all go through it together. So they go through the sequence. This week it's going to be this material, this topic, and actually having this sort of structured group experience really kind of increases the sense of connection and just of meaning. So we've seen a lot of kind of studios and teachers using that quite successfully. And then the other part, I think, is just watching as teachers and studios are getting more sophisticated. So I think early on in the pandemic, people weren't so picky about aesthetics and what it looked like and lighting and all that stuff. But we've really seen a shift in the last, I would say, last 7 months probably, where that stuff has become much more important. The tolerance for sort of, not thinking about aesthetics, it makes the difference between a successful and a not successful course. And the other last piece I would say is I've really noticed people sharing their stories. So actually, weaving in, it's a little bit of the phenomenon of like, if you'll hear the term niching down or getting very specific or specializing, but niching down in a way that connects to your personal story, because then it's imbued with a real sense of personality and meaning. And so we've seen some studios and teachers do that really effectively.
Yeah, those are all really awesome to hear. And I think I just wanted to touch on, the change in quality. And I feel like I've seen this with the people in the studios that I work with as well. And it's just funny to think back to like, some of the first videos we did. And it's like, oh, we're just using like a laptop and Zoom and, whatever microphone was kind of lying around because we're trying to figure out what's going to be best. And, recording in like gallery mode instead of like pinning the speaker and then having to zoom in. And I just remember it being so bad. But people were very like tolerant of it at that point. Like they were just very grateful that, there was a class online and, oh, cool. Like you put the video on Vimeo, like that's cool. I can watch it later. And I think that there's been a big shift. I think that people have really seen like it's kind of gone from like, like, oh, we're going to do this for 2 weeks to, okay, it's clearly longer than 2 weeks, to like, okay, I don't think that this is going away. Like, I feel like a lot of people in the yoga space have recognized that I think online is kind of here to stay and it's going to be there in some capacity. Therefore, it's kind of worth it to invest in a microphone that's going to sound better. And worth it to invest in a camera, and it's worth it to invest in a software and record your videos and put them in, libraries and spend effort on creating like programs and courses, like you were saying, that their audience is going to be interested in. I think that's all just, really smart kind of business in this new world we're living in.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We're not going to totally go back, and so I think there was a little bit of a, all right, I'll just do it for this period of time, and just like you said, it's like, oh, this is an ending. This is like the new trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's kind of like I brought up before. Like I think there's some really great silver linings in it. And I think that there's people who've like, found classes that they really like online, or times where they're like those early morning classes that I was mentioning, where it's like, yeah, this is way better than like going to the studio, especially we're both from places with winter, right? So like, I mean, if you can practice yoga at 6:30 in the morning before you go to work, and you can do it in your pajamas without having to like defrost your car or like shovel snow, even better. um,
Absolutely.
so I think that I think that we are seeing just a lot of kind of more shifts from like, this is temporary to like, this is something that is working well in my business that I'm going to do long term, or that I'm going to continue doing. And I think people are like kind of making the effort to learn the software, learn the technology, invest in the different like products that they need to actually make this stuff better, which totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I would say that maybe ties into just another couple of sub trends that we've seen. So one of them is this idea that It's using technology to help really streamline or enhance your communication, connection, and engagement. So it's still relational based, but you're using technology as a kind of amplifier to the efforts that you're doing so you don't burn yourself out. So, what can technology help you to automate so that you get time back to focus on teaching or focus on a course? So that's been where we've seen users be really successful, is where they're leveraging these technological features or functions to be able to do that. I think the other thing we've also seen is this idea of tiered offerings of different access points. So you might have a weekly class, and then you might have a dedicated practitioner's course. You might have, specialization in one area. So having different levels for people to plug in at based on their interest level and their availability has been another sort of thing that I think has really changed. And the last part that we've seen that I think has become even more important of late, because we're in this for the long run, is getting very clear on metrics. Prior to the pandemic, you could have a loose sense of like, oh yeah, okay, we're doing okay. But given the amount of uncertainty and how things are still changing and shifting, and it's not clear how this is all going to kind of shake out, the importance of setting the metrics that really matter for your business, and specifically for however you as a teacher or you as a studio define success, right? I mean, at one level, you can just default to, can the studio stay open, right? That could be the definition of success. But absent having some clear definition or metric for yourself, it's very noisy right now. So it's really hard to know whether or not you're actually doing the things that are having an impact and helping you succeed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And I think, one of the studios that I work with that's based in the US, we've, collected metrics pretty much on like attendance and revenue and some digital marketing metrics as well. Like basically, since they opened the studio at the beginning of 2018. So it's been, going on 4 years of metrics. And it was very interesting to kind of see how those shifted, through the pandemic and how they are now. And I think it is interesting, like even these studios who have done well that are thriving, it's like the baseline has kind of just changed. Like the expectations kind of just changed in terms of attendance and revenue, because things are just so different for so many people. And I think that it is very important to kind of have this understanding of, your business's health. And I think this goes for all times, not just, kind of coming out of a pandemic and that type of thing, but understanding like kind of like your vehicle, right? Like I think most new vehicles now kind of like give you okay, your service is like coming due, and they'll give you like kind of a health report and health check and that type of thing. And I think we very much need to do the same thing with our business, like whether it's monthly or quarterly, checking in like what's working, what's not working, what's going well, what's not, because I think we just don't have, especially as like a small business owner, it's very hard to have the time and capacity to just like kind of carry dead weight, like classes that aren't working or, workshops that aren't filling, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you're making. I mean, for example, if you use just revenue coming in as your only metric pre-pandemic, there's one studio I'm thinking of. What they saw was they halved their revenue, but they like doubled their attendance. So if I was just using revenue as my metric, I go, oh no, but it turns out that actually the revenue per student was half of what it normally is, but actually their attendance was more than double what it was. So that's where, just as you're saying, like all these things have changed and shifted. So doing that sort of, okay, well, what are my metrics and how am I defining success, in this moment, and then being able to find some way to track that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that that is very important. And also just want to touch on, if you are somebody who's like doubled your attendance and halved your revenue because you've cut your class prices down, it might be time to increase those class prices. Because I don't really think anyone kind of predicted that we would, still be talking about this in like, the fall of 2021 heading into 2022. So I think that it kind of made sense in the beginning to be like, okay, I'm new at this. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't have like good technology or good software, good microphones. So like, yeah, I'll discount the price, but it's like, we're kind of like pros at this now. We shouldn't be
Mhm.
discounting ourselves quite so heavily. So that's my little piece of
Exactly.
advice for people listening.
Yeah, no, that's a point well made, and I think that's exactly right because it's changing, and even what it was 6 months ago or a year before, it's different, and so you have to do that on a more regular basis. About okay, so what are the conditions, and how do I respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, I feel like this is a good place to wrap up. Alex, can you let people know where they can go find out more about you, more about OfferingTree, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find us at offeringtree.com. And if you go to offeringtree.com/MBOM, you'll find the special landing page just for this podcast. And the other part, you can check me out. I teach kind of all over, I'm mostly online these days. Kind of a theme there. But yeah, if you just sort of Google me and Google Alex Haley meditation, you should find me. And yeah, other than that, I hope that something I shared today was useful for you, and I think the most important part is I would just say that what you do matters. So as a teacher in a studio, it really does matter, and it's really important right now, given the sort of ongoing isolation and just the toll that this ongoing pandemic has had. So I really just want to appreciate all of the listeners today for everything that you're doing, because what you do makes a difference, and it doesn't matter.
Amazing. Thank you for that. That's such a beautiful way to end this. And I just really appreciate your time. So thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Alex Haley. Once again, make sure you go check out OfferingTree. Make sure you grab your discount at offeringtree.com/MBOM. If you have any questions about how OfferingTree might be able to serve you, you can reach out to myself or you can reach out to Alex. And we continued this conversation behind the scenes, talking about some of the business lessons that Alex has learned, not only through being a part of a software startup over the last 5 years, but also through his own yoga and meditation business. So if you'd like to hear what he has to share, I would love to have you behind the scenes. You can head on over to patreon.com/MBM yoga. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.